The following Patreon episode is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Here to tell you why it's important to become a patron is our favorite guest, Cam Mallow. Cam, why should they become a patron?
It's important to help bring more new episodes.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, Cam. So if you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg and become one today. We thank you in advance.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. Today, we are talking to another author. And this author is quite accomplished. And the book that we're going to talk about today from his collection of books that he's written is Gettysburg, July 1. His name is David Martin. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So, a couple things. Let's start with who you are first before we get into the book. Who is David Martin, and what makes him so special?
Never had it couched that way. I'm a school teacher and a writer. People ask what I do. I'm a school teacher and administrator. I'm at the Petty School, which is a private high school in Hightstown, New Jersey. Tell you the truth, I didn't know a lot about private high schools. I grew up in Michigan and went to good public schools out there. Went to Michigan, University of Michigan undergrad, got a nice scholarship to Princeton, and they sent me to go to Greece to study archaeology and Greek history, which was a lot of fun. But archaeology is more a hobby for rich people, as I look at it, or people that. Anyway, it's good for teaching. But anyway, I ended up in teaching. There weren't college jobs available, so I got a job up the road from Princeton in Hightstown at a private high school. They had always told me, don't teach at a high school, you'll never leave. And that's what happened to me. I'm in my 44th year as senior faculty member. I enjoy working with students. I do what's neat with classics. I can do Greek, Latin, history, mythology, general humanities and cultural stuff, which is fun. Once in a while, I do lectures on the Civil War. I have done a lecture for the AP US class on what year was the turning point of the war, which might be a good topic down the line also, because there's different ways to interpret what it means to be a turning point.
Right.
And certainly Gettysburg has been argued most commonly, I think, along with Vicksburg, to be the turning point. But I'm digressing on something else. You ask who I am. So I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, I'm a father, a grandfather now also. And reaching my 70s now, I'm starting to slow down a little. For a while there, I was writing almost a book a year in the 80s and 90s. Now it's more like a book every 3 years. I have several underway that I haven't finished, but that's the pleasure of working at a private high school. There's no publish or perish pressure, that I can work on projects that interest me. For example, I'm a consultant at the State Museum for New Jersey Civil War flags, a flag on the 10th New Jersey Regiment, not one of your more famous ones, came on the market. So I spent 3 months doing research and writing up the history of the flags of the 10th New Jersey Regiment, just because that struck me at the moment, and all the other projects took a back burner. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm still writing and active and still in reasonably good health, a little bit weary, as we all are, of the COVID vaccine crisis. And the other thing is, I haven't been to Gettysburg in 7 years, and it's driving
For shame, nuts. David, for shame.
Yes. During the Civil War sesquicentennial, I was on the state committee and gave lectures almost every, couple of months straight through. And we did a great program at Antietam in 2012. We did one at New Jersey at Gettysburg Day, when I ran a tour that went to all the New Jersey monuments in one day, which I had never done before. But the last time I was in Gettysburg was 2014, when we did a program on New Jersey, the 14th New Jersey at Monocacy. I stayed in Gettysburg rather than Frederick. And since then, I've been busy with my family. and haven't gotten back there. And I was actually going to go this week till I realized, A, remember the weather ain't good in Gettysburg in March.
Yeah.
B, the museum's only open on weekends.
Well, it's open Thursday through Monday. It's closed Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
So when the weather perks up some, I'm just going to take some vacation days. One thing that slows me down is I'm head of the summer school here, and people say, "Oh, you're a teacher; you get the summers off." I said, "I know. I'm sorry. I work harder than ever because I'm doing double duty. We're actually organizing it right now, and I'm just going to tell my assistant I'm taking off, going fishing for 3 days. You want me? Use my phone number." I haven't been there, especially since they tore down the hotel by Lee's headquarters. I checked all that out yet. And
it's been a while. You need to come back.
The place changes. I mean, they tore down my favorite motel, which is the Home Sweet Home Motel. And yes, it's improvements on the battlefield, and I need to check out what's going on. And I still haven't been through the museum. I miss the old museum so much because I knew where everything was.
Right.
But then they tore it down. And I don't know if now they have more actual battle artifacts. I'm just amazed to see
They have
like the Whitworth shells that were fired from Oak Hill that ended up down by Devil's Den.
Well, what it is they have, and then the collection is enormous, but what's on display is just scratching the surface of it. However, and
it's generic too. Yeah,
it's rather generic, but they do rotate things in and out of it. However, the difference between now and when you last came was that you have to pay that, and so now you have to pay to see the exhibits, but back then you didn't. But that's it.
Well, I don't know if I get in free if I belong to the Friends of Gettysburg National Park.
No, if you do, then I think I think you can get in for free.
Last time I was there, I forgot it. That kind of annoyed me. But I want to get through there. But to be honest, when I'm at Gettysburg, I'm usually on a project, and I don't have time to go through the museum. I haven't seen the electric map, or the electric map's not even there anymore.
No, it's not
I haven't
there.
seen Cyclorama yet.
Cyclorama is great.
I wrote. I haven't seen that for a long time, but I did a book on New Jersey at Gettysburg, and I was there, hired a couple guides. I was there on my own looking through the exact positions of every regiment and wrote up a New Jersey at Gettysburg guidebook that actually won an award as Best New Jersey Reference Book for that year. And I wish every other state had a guidebook like that to look at specific unit positions and figure out where they were, where the flags were, and that kind of stuff. And that was fun. But when I was there doing that research, I was very focused on getting it done. And my time when I'm at the battlefield is so precious from dawn to dusk. I don't have time to go through the museum. But this trip, I need to start at least doing section by section.
Yeah. Okay, so would you say that Gettysburg is your favorite subject in history, or one of your favorites, or how does it rank up there?
It's probably still one. When I get tired of Gettysburg, which I do periodically, I go down to Antietam. Okay. And Antietam's neat because you can walk all day and just find a few people from townspeople, especially down in the south part of Antietam. There's a lot there that is real neat to study. Lots of regiments, lots of action, lots of sources. That's why once I finished Strengths at Gettysburg, I started a regimental strength at Antietam. It just poses a whole different set of problems researching that, and we can get into that in another program. But Gettysburg being fought on July 1st, they had just done muster rolls for pay the day before, and there's all these records to dig out in the archives. For Antietam being fought in the middle of September, it's a totally different route. I had to go into newspaper articles after battle, and there's a lot of good Confederate newspaper articles that haven't been tapped. Anyway, different set of problems. So, and then my third area is Monmouth Battlefield, because I live 8 miles from Monmouth Battlefield, and that's one reason I haven't been going as much to Gettysburg, because it's a 3-hour drive. I live 15 minutes from Monmouth. Right. I'm president of the Friends of the Battlefield. I'm helping them do original research. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were both there. They were both wounded. There's a lot of neat stuff there. And it is, it's a known battle. It's just not one of the top ones on everybody's tip of their tongues. And I'm working very closely with the historian there, and it's neat to be, one of the country's experts on the Battle of Monmouth. But it's just because I go there all the time. I give tours and stuff like that. So my three top would be Gettysburg, Antietam, and Monmouth. But that's all military history, yes.
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, and I'm ashamed to say I have never been to Monmouth. But
yeah. Well, then, yeah. Well, you need to rectify that, or if you're going to come, give me a call, and I'll give you a tour of what's out there.
Absolutely, I would love it. Yeah, no, I mean, when I come back to visit sometime, I am going to make time because my mother doesn't live too far. Well, actually, my mother's down by the beach and my father's still up north. My sister's still up north, and neither one of them is too far a drive from Monmouth. So, there's
well, that's
really
what's nice. In New Jersey, you're never more than an hour and a half from anywhere in New Jersey.
That's true, yeah. So Gettysburg, July 1, what made you decide to do a book about July 1st? What year did this come out, by the way?
Okay, it came out, I think it was 95.
95,
I've got a copy here.
So this was before, this was before Fonts?
Yeah.
This was before the Fonts book, right? Okay.
And what, well, I'll talk about the book first and then go back and what got me going on it. But,
sure.
Well, maybe not. Okay. I grew up in Michigan. And my great-grandfather was in a Michigan battery, the 8th Michigan Battery. But my favorite regiment was the 24th Michigan, which, as you know, is a key part on the first day.
Right.
And I developed a liking, Lord knows why, for General Reynolds. Mm-hmm. And they're both on the first day. And there wasn't any monograph on the first day out except Hassler's book that came out, I think, in 88. It was just like a prelude to the main battle, and nobody was paying a lot of detailed attention to what was going on there.
And you're saying Hassler with an A, not Hessler with an E.
Hassler, yeah. Warren Hassler,
okay.
Hassler,
okay.
In 88, University of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And I was writing. Long story. I got into liking Civil War because I was a teenager when the Centennial came up. I'm a little bit older than you. I don't think you were around when the Centennial was here.
No.
But I used to get for Christmas a company called Marx, M-A-R-X, like the Marx Brothers, did soldier sets. One was the Revolution, which I liked. One was the Alamo, which I really liked. And one was the Civil War blue and gray set. So I had all these toy soldiers. And I used to play whatever. But then I got the idea of redoing battles. So I actually did in 1963 when I was 14 years old. I researched the battle. I took one of the rooms or half of our basement and made a battlefield out of paper mache and trees and houses and roads and everything. Got the order of the battle out of Battles and Leaders of the Civil War, had enough soldiers that I could make regiments a ratio of 1 for every 300. I had a cannon for every battery, and I just researched the battle from end beginning to end and refought it with the toy soldiers exactly 100 years later, which was cool.
Yeah.
I put that stuff away when I also did Antietam and Chancellorsville, just for the heck of it.
Sure, why not?
Later on. So I went off to University of Michigan to study military history, and I took a course I took a graduate course in the Revolution when I was a freshman in college, and I got an A+ in it, and they didn't know what to do with me. And it was also the days of Vietnam, so I ended up, because my advisor was a Greek teacher, and I had a free course freshman year. He taught me into taking Greek instead of economics, and it was cool and different. And really different. So I started studying Greek, and they gave me a scholarship to go to Rome, and I ended up being a classics major. But I still enjoy American history, especially military history. Went to Princeton, got a scholarship to study archaeology in Greece, and was all ready to teach classics when I finished, but there weren't any jobs. Although we used to say, pardon the French, where there's death, there's hope. You'd really, read the newspapers to see, any Latin teachers die anywhere. That I got make a job opening. Well, there wasn't. So I ended up. That really worked for a friend of mine who taught math. There was a car, one of an accident over near Princeton where a teacher was killed. And he said, oh, my God, let it be a math teacher. And it was. And he got his job. So where there's death, there's hope. So I couldn't get a college job, so I ended up at the high school, the Petty School in Hightstown, New Jersey. And I enjoy working with students and teaching Latin, and I consider myself a wordsmith, which a lot of the way I teach Latin is cognate vocabulary and grammar. But then I got that was the era when war games were popular. So there's a game called Terrible Swiss Sword, which you may have heard about, by Rich Berg. And it's a regimental level game with complicated rules and using historical maps, and it was really cool. So I used to play it by myself or play it with my friends, and that reintroduced my interest to Gettysburg in the late 70s to start going back, especially when I wrote Rich Berg, and he had the 24th Michigan as a unit with 300 men. Okay, and everybody knows the 24th Michigan had 496 men, right? Okay, so I said, look, you got your numbers wrong. And he said, yeah, sure, kid. So I got all my research notes together from when I was 13 and went back and did him an OB on Gettysburg that had better strengths. And I ended up being a consultant to Rich Berg and all these war games they did on Shiloh and Antietam or whatnot for SBI Simulations Publications in New York. And once I was doing their OB research, I started writing for their magazine, Strategy and Tactics. And I remember how excited I was when I got my first article published. And it was on the Terrible Swiss Sword game, comparing history with gaming. So that got me back interested in gaming, specifically Gettysburg. So I was writing for SBI for quite a while, and they hooked me up because I had done an article on Jackson's Valley campaign with Bob Pidgeon from Combined Books in Philadelphia, and he was starting a series of great campaigns of the Civil War. The monographs, 192 pages each. And the first one I did for him was on Jackson's Valley campaign. And that went so well that I was doing others. And I have trouble even rattling them all off, but I've done Shiloh, the Peninsula. I did one on Monmouth for them, Chancellorsville. I can't remember them all. So what I proposed to him was that why don't we, a friend of mine, Al Nofi, had done a 1-volume, 192-page Gettysburg book. And I said, you can't do Gettysburg in 192 pages. Why don't we do a day 1 and then a day 2 and a day 3, each at 192 pages? And that's what I proposed to do. And he countered back to me and said, why don't you just do July 1, because there's nothing much out there except the Hassler book, and write everything you want. And I said, well, okay. And this was quite a change from the campaign books I was doing, which were 192 pages, canned format, lots of pictures, no footnotes. And so I wrote July 1 because it was there, and I said I had already had the interest in July 1 because of the 24th Michigan and General Reynolds. I'm not a Buford fan, but we can get into that later in the talk, as much as everybody else. And ended up with 2,500 footnotes and no pictures except the one on the cover and a lot of maps. So he just gave me free rein to write as much as I wanted on July 1. And that came out in 95. Ironically, a fellow, Gene Shue, did a book called Morning at Willoughby Run, which was the morning part of the first day. Yeah. Came out exactly the same time as mine. And then in 2001 or thereabouts, Harry Fons did a July 1, which, to be honest, I haven't read. It's more an operational book. I love everything Fons wrote, and if you were to ask me, or I get polled every once in a while, what my favorite book on the Civil War is, which is another topic I'd be happy to contribute to, probably the footnotes to Coddington's Gettysburg campaign. But my second favorite Civil War book is Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill by Harry Fons. Okay. Because he tells a lot of detail on something people really haven't looked at before with alternate versions. And because of my training as a classicist, on rebuilding ancient history and my work in Latin and Greek with language, I'd like to look at and evaluate all the sources and what's happening. Like with John Burns on July 1, if you have 2 or 3 sources, you can weave them together to make a narrative. But what happens with Gettysburg, when you start getting 8 or 10 sources, they start conflicting with each other.
Right.
And you have to evaluate them. Now, a lot of the history books will just or just give a version of what's going on and maybe put the other sources or not in a footnote. What I did in July 1, and that's why I asked you to look at the Death of Reynolds section, was to go through all the sources and all the claimants. There's like 8 or 10 stories there on how did Reynolds die, who shot him, what happened, and weigh each one, because they're all different versions, or they fall into groups. Was it artillery? Was it friendly fire? Was it Confederates from the west, Confederates from the north, whatever, and weigh that all through, and that takes like 10 pages of the book to discuss.
Yeah.
But then you get a better feel for what's going on in the battle, and in that case, you come to a conclusion. What's likely to have happened, in my belief, is still it wasn't a sharpshooter, and in spite of certain specific Confederate sharpshooters claiming to have done it, there was too much smoke, and he's on the other side of the woods.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't. There's no what they call line of sight from Hers Ridge over to or wherever they were into that corner of Herbst Woods, that it was probably just an overshot from from Davis's brigade. But I come to my opinion. Now, people may feel differently, the next generation, or there might be more evidence that comes up. But I do that throughout the book, and I mentioned John Burns as a local hero like Jenny Wade, except he's the first day hero. And he does seem to have fought with 2 or 3 different regiments. It's a really, really neat story with multiple levels to it. But you need to get into what's called source criticism. And that's what I was trained at Princeton and Classics, because when you look at what happened with Julius Caesar or Nero or somebody, you need to be aware that we only have like 20% of the ancient sources.
Right.
And we're trying to weave together ancient history based on 20% of the sources. And you got some statues, you may have a painting, you got sources by a historian named Suetonius who didn't like emperors at all. You have to weigh the sources, look at the biases of the sources. When you're looking at, when I was young, when you're reading Gettysburg, I remember when I discovered the official records of the Civil War, and I was like 12. And they weren't available in my town. They were in Flint, which was an hour away. And I went down and read them and copied them, took notes, and thought they were God's gift to the world until I figured out at about age 25, you got to see who's writing the report. When are they writing it? What axes do they have to grind? And you have to weigh the sources. So you're all the time citing official records as a source, but you got to also evaluate them. So that's what my training as a classicist was to collect sources and evaluate them.
Well, let's go back to...
I've applied that training to this, and that's also what I did with Reginald Strength at Gettysburg. Yes, go back to...
Well, let's go back to the death of General Reynolds, because that was one of the parts you suggested we read, and I read it, and I agree with your conclusion. But why don't we talk about, from what you can remember, if you're doing this off the top of your head, what the different accounts were? Some of the ones, coming from the 55th North Carolina, and I think there were 2 from that regiment, if I'm not mistaken, or one that you surmised was from that regiment, and the other one actually was. Is that right?
Yeah, just to set the scene, General Reynolds was the wing commander, 1st, 3rd, and 11th Corps, coming on the field around 10 o'clock on the morning. By the way, there was this common story that Reynolds had been offered command of the Army before Meade was. I still haven't nailed that down. I don't know if I'm 100% behind that. It's more to glorify him. He's the highest-ranking, Union officer killed at the battle, and that's there. And I haven't seen what the current studies are. I don't know if there's any articles in Gettysburg Magazine or somewhere. That's where the current.
My understanding was always that he had a meeting with Lincoln, but no actual record of that meeting exists, and historians have concluded that possibly the command of the Army was discussed, and Reynolds demurred because Washington meddles too much. But nobody knows for sure. But I think over the years it has been presented as that was definitely what it was.
That's the common belief. Again, I couldn't nail it down 100%, but that's the common story. So the question is, what is a wing commander doing posting a regiment, the 2nd Wisconsin, at a holding action? That's just the kind of leader he was. And unfortunately, aggressive leaders like Stonewall Jackson, who lead from the front, end up being the battle casualties. Whereas those like General Meade, who leads from the back, which is maybe where that's where I would be anyway, where a leader ought to be, Meade was actually wounded earlier in the war. So when Reynolds is posting the regiment there on the edge of Herbst Woods, there's different versions of from like 3 or 4 different Confederate regiments, and there were sharpshooters around. And what people don't realize so much, Lee were sharpshooter battalions earlier in the war, and some came out after Gettysburg. And what's interesting, when I did my Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg book, you would think that the order of battle would be fully set for something as famous and studied as Gettysburg. But everybody's tend to have followed what's either in Battles and Leaders or in the official records. Turns out there was a 3rd Georgia Battalion of Confederate sharpshooters in Wofford's brigade that had never been listed in anybody's OBs. And I found battle casualties, and then eventually found their muster rolls, a strength of almost 200. But Wofford didn't write a full report. But again, when we talk about that, hopefully on another session, when I did the regimental strengths and losses, I was also nailing down the order of battle, because not every regiment had 10 companies. Right. Some were on detached duty. Some regiments never had a company B in the first place. It just really opens your eyes on why you shouldn't accept what's been taken as gospel. It needs to be re-researched every generation or so. So there were in some of the regiments, especially North Carolina, a designated sharpshooter or two. Different than the guys that are on skirmishers, because when they send out a skirmish line, they just grab a company and say, you guys go out and be skirmishers. But there are designated sharpshooters, and that one of those stories I told in there, who would be available, and the general would say, or their commander, colonel would say, there's a guy on a horse over there. Why don't you take care of him? And it's interesting, when I give my tours at Monmouth, I always say, if you're an American Continental infantryman and you see anybody British in red uniform on a horse, shoot him, because he's either a general, a colonel, or an aide delivering messages, any one of which will be to our advantage to take out of action. Now, at least in the Revolution, it wasn't thought to be gentlemanly to shoot, because we shot what the main Confederate general at Saratoga, which is the reason we won Saratoga, is a sharpshooter took out the Confederate general, the British general. Yeah, by the time of the Civil War, that's not a problem, although specific sharpshooters taking out specific generals, other than what happened on Little Round Top, where the stories coming out of Devil's Den, and they got Hazlitt and Weed on consecutive shots almost. There are stories there. Now, the problem is you have to go and check out the line of sight. And there's so much smoke there, and Reynolds is at the southwest corner of Herbst Woods. I don't think there's a line of sight, and I mentioned that in the book, from where these different sharpshooters claimed they were. And there's also a question, there's Lieutenant Colonel Callis. There are other officers around riding horses. And in all the smoke and confusion, if you happen to shoot somebody on the other side on a horse, how do you know who it was? Yeah. You don't. And people start 5-6 years after the war saying, well, I did this, I did that. You just don't know. So, but it turned out with some of those Confederate accounts, it wasn't them jumping up and down or wanting a medal to do it. And that's what's interesting about our Civil War, is that how readily afterwards we accepted the opposition. And I not to get political, but just I've been thinking about this. I mean, if you went to D-Day, which I haven't done yet, it's on my bucket list.
Yeah,
and there were all kinds of monuments there to the different German regiments. Well, how would you feel?
Yeah. But the difference is that they were always foreigners. And I think that's why Americans have a hard time grappling with that whole thing.
Yeah, and General Wheeler was leading American troops, Confederate cavalry officer down in the Spanish-American War. And it grates me, and I don't know what your stance on this, and I shouldn't be getting political, but when I read in Civil War News or something that there's movements out there, there are still 1,600 Confederate-type monuments on the battlefields and in the Confederate towns, and certain people want them all taken down. And our stance is, at least the Sons of Union veterans of the Civil War, in that they were, in order to understand the battle correctly, you need those markers up there for the regiments and what brigades were where.
Yeah. And I always say, what good is Batman without the Joker? Like, you need to have something, and also just to help, put troop placements and things like that in mind. The problem I have, and it's I don't know what my stance is, because I take it on a case-by-case basis, because they're not all the same. What's in a town is not the same as what's on a battlefield. Or a
cemetery.
Or a cemetery, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you gotta, it's very complicated. I don't think anything glorifying an enemy of the United States, no matter who that enemy is, and I might extend that to Crazy Horse, even though I think that I think that they got a bad deal for sure. I'm actually kind of somewhat more sympathetic to the Native Americans in some cases, in most cases probably, but if we're gonna be tearing down things that are erected to what were once enemies of the United States, regardless of what we feel about them today, then they all got to come down. So how
scary to see?
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with Crazy Horse. See, that's the thing, is I don't have a problem with Crazy Horse having a monument, because it is something that commemorates a past event that is no longer, and someone who was a big part of that. And whether he was on our side or the other side, it shaped our history. It shaped who we are today. Yeah. It's just glorifying certain people or ideologies. That's where it gets tricky. So I don't know. I'm all over the place on this.
Yeah, so I'm probably spending too much time on this, but I could see removing Confederate flags off the metal markers at Gettysburg. If they have to take the Confederate monuments down, then have a little park area where you can see them all, because Gettysburg's a great outdoor artistic sculpture garden.
Yeah.
But it's just when certain groups or certain individuals start making noise about it, and I could see, that road in Richmond where every statues of General Lee and Jefferson Davis and everybody except Arthur Ashe came down. It's in different times now.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're digressing from where we were. So we're talking about the death of General Reynolds.
Right.
So what I did in the book was to go through the different versions. General Heath thought it was one of his cannons that had taken him out, but we know that he was killed by a musket ball. A couple of the sharpshooter accounts mentioned shooting a Union officer on a horse posting a battery. Well, Reynolds was not posting a battery at the time, so that eliminates those. And that's why I came down, and again, I talked about the smoke in the line of sight, that I think it was just an overshot, either from Archer's brigade, which was quickly driven out of the woods, or even from Davis's brigade, which is north of the railroad cut. It was just I'm just saying it was probably a stray shot.
So in other words, he wasn't targeted. But you do point out, though, that he wasn't the only one. So for those people that don't know, it wasn't like Reynolds was there all alone. Reynolds was surrounded by his staff, correct?
And one of the staff members' horse went down, and a couple guys got wounded. Kind of like when Jackson was shot at Chancellorsville. There's a list now. 6 or 8 guys got hit. It's terrible because there were like 2 volleys, but that was friendly fire. That's been conclusively prove
for Jackson. You're talking about.
Yeah.
But Reynolds was You placed Reynolds, according to one of the Second Wisconsin boys. Reynolds was to the right rear of
to the right wing.
Of the Second Wisconsin.
And I accept that, and that's part of that, of reading through all the sources and seeing what might be the more reasonable one. Mm-hmm. But what my philosophy was in presenting all the alternate versions is to let the reader do their own picking. And I say, I'm not selective. I'm including all the sources I have.
Right.
I may be biased in the order I present them or the conclusion I come to or even how I group them. But all the sources are here. If you want to believe otherwise, you're welcome to do so. This is just what I believe after having been through all these sources. And I may, 20 years later, have changed my mind. I haven't on this one, but once in a while, you're permitted. And where that really comes out is I wrote a book on Molly Pitcher at Monmouth. Who's a legend, but also apparently a historical personage. But that has been a bear to try to prove because all the sources just aren't there.
Interesting.
And I change my minds a little bit once in a while about what's what. But having researched all the sources and being annoyed at the way everybody just keeps blindly repeating each other rather than looking back to the original sources. And I had dug up some original sources that nobody had really looked at before. And integrated what her movements were supposed to be versus some sources that I had found to make that work, that it seems that she was a woman, Mary Hayes Macaulay, was really there, and how that worked. But you have to look at the source work, and that also goes back, as I mentioned, to my training as a classicist, which is interpreting ancient events when you only got 20% of the sources and trying to make a logic out of them. So anyway, the death of Reynolds is one of the key points of the battle, but it's also one of the more controversial ones. I had also mentioned John Burns is a neat story. He was such a local hero that he had fed on that. He got to meet Lincoln when Lincoln came to give the Gettysburg Address, as you know. And several accounts with Burns want to mention him just because he was famous and they want to get included in the bandwagon, I guess. There were a couple other, apparently, locals that were wandering the field, but clearly the neatest story is him. And once you piece it together, apparently he was with 3 different regiments during the course of the day. Apparently he was wounded and lay on the battlefield overnight till he literally crawled to the doorstep of one of his neighbors. It's just a really, really neat story of bravery. And these battles are all about individuals. Mm-hmm. And I tend to get consumed by talking about the 24th Michigan. Well, the 24th Michigan is a construct. It's a bunch of people, but it doesn't have an existence of its own. Mm-hmm. It's all these individuals that each have stories. And that's why I really like the section I did on the Union retreat through the town. Officers who had been wounded earlier in the day were being taken care of in the houses. They're getting captured. People are getting lost. What was it like to be there then? If you're coming out, especially the right wing of the First Corps, trying to retreat through the town with the 11th Corps there, Confederates all over the place, and just the sheer mayhem of what was going on then is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, sure.
And when you're going through that, you can, kind of trace individual Confederate regiments, because some, especially from Perrin's Brigade, which was the first one to get into town, because they had broken the Union line south of the seminary, one regiment went in and was afraid of getting cut off in town and pulled back. Another regiment went in, they came back. One of Daniel's regiments, I think maybe it was Ramseur, came in on the railroad line and came in. A bunch of Union troops holed up. You know the story of the Chaplain Howell, who was accidentally shot on the front of the Lutheran church steps. Sure. And I hadn't been aware of the Eagle Hotel. Almost a whole Union regiment holed up in the Eagle Hotel until they finally surrendered. It's just the stories that were Sergeant Humiston. There's just a lot of neat stories of individuals. And General Schimmelpfennig, who had hid in the backyard in somebody's pigsty or something for the rest of
and there's also that story from, I think, the 76th New York of a woman handing out water whose heart was pierced by a bullet and she died. And that might be, it might be confused with Jenny Wade.
Yeah, and there were. I mean, there's a story of a kid that picked up an artillery shell and blew himself up after the battle. There were others around. It's just they got most of the press on that. But what's interesting is,
there wasn't another. Sorry to interrupt you. There wasn't another woman who died during the battle. So there's this account in there from the 76 New York from during the retreat. But you say it's probably
I don't remember
confused.
her name. Yeah, I don't remember if I even gave her name.
Apparently she's a nameless heroine is the term. Yeah.
So what I started to say was, I'm sorry, Blue and Gray magazine has gone out of print because they were just so great with their tours and detailed battles. And in one of their in the last year or so, I got a call from Dave Roth to do Gettysburg the town fight, and that's what I'm really. One of the aspects I include in the July 1 book is how the townspeople reacted when the Union troops came through the town during the morning to go up to the front, when they're retreating back through the town, when they're taking care of the wounded, when they're being occupied by the Confederates, the Confederate sharpshooters that were up there for 2 days, and all the fighting that was going on just below or just north of Cemetery Hill, and then the Jenny Wade story in that. So I'm very happy that was on my bucket list to be able to, put an article out for Blue and Gray anyway. That what's there, I'm looking more and more probable to retire to Gettysburg in a couple of years.
There you go.
And one thing I might want to do is, help out with the Adams County Historical Society, which is where I'm sure they can use some volunteer help and, learn what it was like to be living there. Every barn within 5 miles of the battlefield was a hospital for one side or the other. What I read more and more about what the battlefield was like in the months after the battle, with all the wounded, all the dead horses, all the burials. It was more than just, it was a 3-day whirlwind that swept through town that affected it all the way to it affected the town of Gettysburg all the way till today.
Yeah.
And you have to have respect for it as a battlefield rather than as a tourist place. I mean, when I was younger, I used to also take my son up to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and to us, with all the ice cream and fudge places, it was Gettysburg on a lake. Neat things to go see. It's up there, it's baseball, and at Gettysburg, it's battles.
Yeah.
But you have to respect what the suffering and the hurt that went on there. Anyway, but I'm getting close.
I wish the government would change the word park in the name Gettysburg National Military Park. Change it to memorial or something like that, because the modern American is not taught the value of this place, the importance of this place, and I think even the word memorial is lost on most people today. But at least if you throw that word in there, maybe people would not treat it like it's just your typical recreation park at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood. In the suburbs.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm struggling to see what you would use. I mean, I, again, volunteer every weekend, have for 20 years, at Monmouth Battlefield State Park.
Yeah.
And what we have there is a green area. We have hikers, we have Boy Scouts, we have bird watchers, we have tree huggers, and we have historians. The reason for having the park is it was a battlefield, but it's multi-use.
Right.
But Gettysburg is more than that.
Yes.
I don't know what term might work. I have to
memorial. It's just a giant 6,000 acre memorial. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's got to be a word that its meaning can't be confused. Park. Yeah, people hear that word and they think of different things. Everybody has a different idea of what a park is.
Because originally the War Department managed it before it got turned over to the National Park System in the 30s or whatever that was. What did they call it back then?
Eric, do you know what this was? Wasn't it? It was like a memorial something, wasn't it?
It was. No, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
No, it was always a military park.
National Battlefield, maybe. I have. They used to in the 1890s or so.
Antietam is
annual reports. Yeah,
Antietam's a national battlefield. Gettysburg, I don't think was ever a national battlefield. I think it was always
no. But he's saying when it was in private hands, when it was not in the government's hands.
I don't know.
General Crawford had bought the Wheatfield area, and different individuals were keeping it, and then that got consolidated under the War Department.
Well, there was the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. That was the organization.
When the GBMA owned it, but I don't know that they ever called it anything other than a park.
I don't know either.
I'm not sure what the GBMA called it.
I feel like there was. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
We can look that up for your listeners. We'll get and come back to you with that. But you're right in that I wish it weren't called a park. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think originally it was a good idea because, people, well, maybe I'm being unfair to modern Americans, but I have a feeling that enough Americans in the olden days had a certain level of respect for certain things, and they understood that even though you call it a park, it's not a place where you go and have fun. Although you look at all the things that they did have here on what we call sacred ground today.
The trolley and everything.
Yeah, the trolley, hotels, amusement parks. Maybe
science.
Yeah, right. Maybe I'm full of it. Maybe they're people have always been stupid and classless. I don't know, but I think now more than ever, it's just there's I don't know. I think our culture is just completely gone, and we need to just dumb it down for everybody.
Honestly, in my opinion, I shouldn't even call it a memorial. Just go back to calling it a national battle, or go to calling it a national battlefield. It gives a different connotation than park does.
Yeah. And do you think, is the military planning on using it for tank exercises ever again? Or
not likely.
Yeah, so maybe we should redesignate it. Of course, that's probably like a 35-year process to go through to make that happen. Should be pretty easy, but of course it's not. The other thing about the book July 1 that I really like, and this is, I think, very important in understanding any battle. But since we're talking about Gettysburg, obviously here, it's Appendix 3. You have several appendices, and Appendix 3 is topographical, and you talk about the roads, the ridges, the hills, all of these things. They play a huge role in the Battle of Gettysburg. They're the reason for the season. I mean, it's the reason everything happens the way it does. No?
And I mean, everybody talks about 10 or 11 or 12, depending on how you count them, number of roads that meet there at Gettysburg. But I do point out, even in the introduction, that decisive battle of that campaign could have happened anywhere between Frederick, Maryland, and New York.
Right.
Those towns also have roads that come together. Why it specifically happened at Gettysburg was from some decisions that General Buford and made, and a strange one that General Hill made on June 30th. Pettigrew should have had that town on the 30th. But they always say, the road network, and then I list all the roads. But then what's the impact? What were the roads like? Okay, they weren't turnpikes. And the key to that with the road network is, yes, there's a railroad line there, but it wasn't of good use then, although Lincoln was able to bring it in. But the railroad west of town wasn't even finished. That's why you get the railroad cuts that figure in the first day's battle.
Right.
And there was coming in from the other way. But the main problem, and this is maybe actually why Lee lost the battle, is his main access for 2/3 of his army is the Chambersburg Pike, or the Cashtown Pike. And he had whole divisions. He had that whole road backed up with troops from about noon on July 1 until noon the next day. Anderson's division could have been on the field, except it's backed up on the pike. And what's interesting is, like, the Third Corps artillery was clogging up the road.
Yeah.
And Pickett's division could have been on the field on the first day, except all these Confederate troops are trying to come through Cashtown Pass on that one road.
Yeah.
If there had been other parallel roads coming in, or if they knew what was going on, they could have sent some troops down to Fairfield, a little bit longer march, but bring them in that way. That is a severe impact on the battle, that the road network helped the battle happen, but it hindered the Confederates. Whereas on the Union side, because Meade had spread his troops out with having the Third Corps over at Emmonsburg and, the Second Corps down in Taneytown, and then Sixth Corps is over in Manchester somewhere, they're coming in all on separate roads. So they all got to the battlefield quicker.
Right.
And that needs to be evaluated when you're looking at the road network, which is part of the topographical history.
And also Reynolds very wisely ordered Howard, when Howard told him in the morning, hey, I'm heading to Gettysburg, and he even mentions that he's got his wagons intermingled, Reynolds writes back to him and says, no, put them in the back, the infantry gets right of way. So he knew, let's not gum up the works, let's just get the troops to where they need to be.
Yeah.
The Confederates don't seem, they're kind of going around a little more blind. Obviously.
Yeah, and talking about being blind, Lee's Stuart's always criticized for not being on the battlefield through a misunderstanding of orders or whatever Lee let him do. But Stuart only had 4 brigades with him. Lee had access to 3 brigades of cavalry, but they weren't there with him at the critical moment on the morning, either the 30th or the morning first day. And he lets Heath lead the advance, which is a new division. And he leads the advance with Archer's brigade, which was under strength, and Davis's, which is a political appointee. And they just get really messed up because they don't have their best leaders there. One of the what-ifs that I discuss elsewhere in the book, what if Stonewall Jackson had been there? Well, if Jackson had been there, Hill's division, light division, would never have been broken up.
Yeah.
And what if Jackson was there with Hill's light division on the morning of the first day? They would have been on Cemetery Hill by noon.
Perhaps they never would have ever met at Gettysburg.
Or they wouldn't even have met there. But that gets into why didn't the Confederates try to take Cemetery Hill at the end of the day, which I have a discussion of at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. And they blame Ewell and for Lee being too lackadaisical and take the hill if you can. And just everybody deferred to everybody else. They were tired out.
They're exhausted.
There were a lot of Union troops coming on the field. And what's interesting is I had played that out with miniatures. Mm-hmm. And I found, and I made it work one time when I was the Confederates. If you're familiar with Stevens Knoll, I trust.
Yes.
Okay. If Ewell had, if Early had attacked with Hayes' brigade on Stevens Knoll, that was the point that would have broke the line. But that's Monday morning quarterbacking. But I did get it to work by having a charge right there. You get up the right flank then of Cemetery Hill. You have woods cover on the to the left as you're making the attack.
Right.
But anyway, I in miniatures won the battle by having a late attack on Stevens Knoll. Well, you don't know until you try it.
You bring up Stuart and the cavalry, and one of the points that we often try to ram home to people, to our listeners, and Tim Smith, Tim Smith, of course, he often brings this up, and that is that Lee. It's not that Lee didn't have cavalry; it's that he didn't use the cavalry he had. And here's something I talked about with Noah Andre Trudeau in his interview, and that is the lost cause religion. How do you? You're going to encounter it as you go through different sources and things. What do you do when it's like obvious that whatever you're reading is lost cause propaganda and not a lot of history? How do you sift through it? Do you present it, or do you just completely throw it out whole cloth, or what do you do?
If I'm writing a book like this, I might bring it up. I haven't been an advocate of that. Yes, Stuart's a war hero because he died in battle in '64, and I haven't been part of the pro-Virginia clan of if you weren't a general from Virginia, you weren't one of the best generals,
right.
i.e. Longstreet, which is, I happen to name my company Longstreet
right.
House because my silent partner is a Longstreet.
Neat.
But you always want to kind of support the underdog. There's more to the war going on than just Virginia. that, I mean, I try to stay clear of it because I'm interested in what happened on the field with the individual soldiers, I said, and put the footnotes down. I'm not real good on, overarching theory or interpretation of the war afterwards. And Longstreet certainly had a handle in all that, becoming a turncoat Republican when he took his the job he got after the war.
Right.
But there's a certain set of heroes, and now the question: do you include Pickett in that or not? Because there's a Pickett-Lee break that happened.
Right, right.
But Sidney Johnston was a great general. Lee wasn't maybe the best Confederate general in the war when you look at it. But those things are fun to debate. I've given a talk which was, ranking or evaluating the Union Corps commanders at Gettysburg. Who did a good job, who didn't, who did the best job, who has the most potential. And, you got to come up with Hancock, who is on the first day, by the way.
Sure.
Because he helped save the day at the end of the day. But they all did other things in 64, and 64 was just awful all around on both sides. I mean, the more I look into it, I'm frustrated, especially when I was working on the 10th New Jersey. The battle reports aren't all there because, dang it, they were fighting for 6 straight weeks from the Wilderness down to Petersburg, and nobody had time to write reports.
Right.
And they're taking losses right and left, and to try to figure out what was going on is just a different kind. It's more World War I type of war.
Right, it's a mess.
With static lines and trenches and try to outflank and all that. And the war is so different by then. It's hard to research what was going on, and which is frustrating to me because I like to see what was going on. I was trying to work with the 10th New Jersey on where they lost battle flags right and left. Just troops, and the troops were with all the draftees coming in, and everybody's getting worn down. And it's a wonder that the war kept going that long. I mean, the South had no choice but to defend themselves, and the North kept throwing troops in. But the big difference, and this is the talk when I do the talk about the turning points of the war, is in many ways, well, I can argue for 62, I can argue for summer 63, but I can also argue for 64 as the turning point of the war, depending on what mood I'm in. But the difference in the North is they got all the foreign troops or foreigners enlisting, because in gaming terms and military terms, you need a 3-to-1 advantage to win. And the North had like a 2.5 or 2.2 advantage in the beginning, but once you get all the foreign-born troops and then the black troops coming in, that's what put them over. That when you got to win battles, but you got to garrison the places that you win.
Right.
And the manpower difference was with the black troops and the foreigners. But if Sherman hadn't taken Atlanta in 64, would Lincoln have gotten reelected? So one argument is the turning point of the war is the 64 election, because that could have gone the other way. The Democrats would have done better to put a different candidate out, but that's what they went, and that may have shot themselves in the foot. No pun. Because McClellan was an anti-war general, a general running on an anti-war platform just didn't make sense.
There seems to be I think a lot of historians do this, and I know a lot of the public does this, and that is that they take the human element out of all of this stuff. You mentioned before about taking Culp's and Cemetery Hill at the end of July 1st, and you said, well, they were tired, and that's a lot. That's you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people would say, well, yeah, but you could have done this. It's like, I'm sorry. Have you been bone tired before? Have you fought in a battle? Have you marched miles and then fought in a battle in, extreme heat before? And you're saying that these guys could have done it if they wanted to do it. I'm starting to see that a lot more now with historians and also students of the war, is that they demand to have these things considered. And I see that in your book, but you wrote this, in the 90s, so you're kind of like ahead of the curve there on that. You're very practical reasoning for various things. Like, for example, the section on Reynolds' death is you put all the accounts there and you say, well, this one doesn't make sense. It does make sense, whatever it may be. I guess I didn't really have a question. Actually, it's just an observation.
Yeah, if I want to throw in there, I mean, I have a multi-background, which maybe makes my writing coming in from that different angle.
Okay.
With the training, looking at sources as the class says. But I was also a reenactor in the 80s.
Okay.
And I will admit to anybody, I learned more from 1 year of reenacting than from every book I ever read.
And is that because you're able to, I mean, you're not obviously in the same situation as them, but you're still in a situation that you're not used to or comfortable with, and you can maybe you have a good enough imagination to extrapolate out, what is that like? If I didn't like this one weekend because of this element and that, it's got to be worse when you're going through it for real.
Yeah, and I just to walk a mile in my shoes, as they say.
Yes.
And it just amazes me that supposedly 3 soldiers died of disease for every one that was in a battle. The healthy ones that survived all the diseases line up and shoot at each other. And battles are sometimes determined on. Well, that's what happened, right?
No, I know. It's it's boiling it down, and it's pretty good.
That what officers happened to be there that day, or what did Lee really have a heart attack? A week before Gettysburg. Is that why he wasn't out checking out where his troops were on the evening of the 1st or morning of the 2nd? That's why he let Longstreet get away with what Longstreet got away with, because Lee wasn't feeling good.
Yeah.
Did General Hill have whatever venereal disease he had, or he ate too many green apples? I've been through eating too many green apples on a reenactment campaign.
But that's the thing.
Fun.
Yeah, and we, I point this out a lot too, because I think it's a very real thing, and that is, talk about Lee's diarrhea, that he supposedly had diarrhea, or as you say, he's developing heart issues and things. People think I'm trying to be funny when I bring it up, but I'm really not. I'm pointing out something that's very real that everyone should, as soon as you hear it, should go, oh yeah, okay, I could totally understand this, because we've got modern creature comforts. We've got luxuries like air conditioning and all that other stuff, and you can call in sick if you got a bad case of diarrhea, and you can stay at home in the comfort of your bed and run to the bathroom every time you need a chance, and you can shower many times as you want. You can do all these things, keep cool so it's not as miserable because of your air conditioning and everything. Lee can't do any of that stuff. He's out in the heat. He's wearing wool. He's wearing long johns that probably haven't been changed in quite a while. He's riding a horse, and he's got diarrhea. That's got to be miserable.
Yeah. Well, are you aware that? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Before Antietam, Lee fell off his horse. Yeah. And almost broke both his wrists.
Yeah, he had to ride in an ambulance, right?
Nobody, when they're talking about who's doing what at the battle, say Lee is in physical pain, can't ride a horse. His wrists are beat up. It's amazing how he managed to run that battle.
Yeah. That's the thing is those are very real things, and I think a lot of people when you bring it up, the look on their face is that of well, why are you making excuses? It's not an excuse; it's a very real thing, and yet the guy still did his job. Maybe he didn't do it great, but he still did it, and it's like people have a sniffle and their boss says, hey, you messed up on this report yesterday. It's like, well, come on, I got a cold. And it's like Lee's supposed to be able to win a battle because he has diarrhea and that's no big deal. These are very real things that you have to take into consideration. And to me, it's remarkable that any of these people, from Lee down to the common soldier, were able to do any of the things that they do. And, so I think that's the way people need to look at it, is not,
to get back to the sources, that's where you need the diaries and the letters to see what was really going on with these people, what was affecting the troops if they hadn't gotten any fresh food for 3 days. I mean, we just take it for granted that, troops like the 1st New Jersey Brigade marched 38 miles in 36 hours or something like that. They got to the field, but they didn't have any of their rations with them. So they had, just to exert yourself that much, because yes, it's a crisis, yet not have anything to eat. You can just read about it, but that's why I say when you're out reenacting and you realize what that meant, everywhere they went, they walked.
Yes.
Lee's whole army, everywhere they walked, and after they lost the battle, unless you're wounded in Imboden's awful wagon train heading south, you're walking back home after you lost with probably some kind of wound.
Yep. Yeah. And, you want to talk about getting hangry. If people go long without, if they skip lunch and then by 4 o'clock they're talking about we need to eat soon because I'm going to get hangry. It's like these guys haven't eaten for days, or maybe at most they had a cracker, and you're complaining that you haven't had lunch.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing when I'm looking at regimental strengths at Antietam, the Confederates were pushing towards the field so hard after they captured Harper's Ferry that they're eating green corn. Mm-hmm. And you wonder why, and that the number of stragglers that came up to Antietam the day after the battle because they had dropped out through exhaustion or diarrhea.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and that's why Lee was able to stay on the field another day, because all these guys were straggling in.
What a miss.
Yeah.
So you've got a ton of books that you've written, and so we're going to have you on as many times as you're willing to come on, David.
I've enjoyed this. I really have. We haven't had trouble keeping to our topic. But
who cares?
To talk with you and to kick ideas around.
Yeah.
This is what often happens when I do. I used to do almost a lecture a month before the virus hit, and I miss being out with the public and kicking ideas around, or being at my round table. Who they're now having online meetings, which is just different.
It's not the same.
People in person. Hope to meet you sometime. That's great. I'd be glad to come back.
Well, yeah, come on down to Gettysburg soon, and but if not, I mean, we can keep doing them over the phone because, like I said, you got plenty of other books. This book that we're talking about today is Gettysburg July 1st by David Martin. You can find it on Amazon. You said you have a few copies on Amazon that you would autograph, right?
Yep. If you order it from Longstreet House on Amazon and just say, ask for an autograph.
So it's got to be the seller has to be Longstreet House. So if you go and you look for the book, it's got to be Longstreet House.
Yeah.
And so you can go ahead and get that there on Amazon. Longstreet House has other books. Give me some of the titles of the books that Longstreet has.
We're the original publishers of Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg. I was doing a series on New Jersey regiments. We did the 7th and the 14th and the 15th and Battery B and New Jersey at Gettysburg. Anyway, they're all listed on the website.
And the website is longstreethouse.com.
Yeah.
Okay. People can order books off of the website, right?
Yep.
Okay.
They can get it off the website. The prices might be better on Amazon, but there's different deals that are cooked up on both. Order more than one book, get free shipping and that. So there's different deals on both sites.
All right, great. Very good. Well, like I said, we'll have you back on, talk about another book. But in the meantime, David Martin, thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here. I much enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next time. All right, David. Thanks very much.
Okay. Hey, this has been fun.